David Martin from the Kuadrant team. And this is a short video to show how you can use Kuadrant along with some other open source tools to get API management-like functionality in a kube-native environment. So the full walkthrough, if you want to try this out yourself, is available on our doc site, docs.kuadrant.io. So some of the main features I'll show here are API design, API security and access control, API monitoring, and traffic management and scalability. So I already have a local environment set up here. So if I swap over to a terminal here, I have three windows open here, or three tabs. So the top one is, let's say the hub cluster. So using open cluster management terminology, we have the hub at the top. Bottom left, we have one of the spoke clusters. On the bottom right, this is our second spoke cluster. So first of all, let's have a look at some of the resources here, the gateway that we have. So in the hub cluster, we'll have a look at, we have a TLS policy, DNS policy, and gateway. So the gateway here has a class of a Kuadrant multi-cluster gateway. And what's happening behind the scenes here is Kuadrant is distributing that to one or more clusters. They are actually Istio gateway classes in the spoke clusters, but this allows us to manage it centrally. And we have a TLS policy and a DNS policy targeting that gateway. So the TLS policy ensures that SSL or TLS certs are distributed to both gateways in those spoke clusters. The DNS policy ensures that DNS entries, A records, CNAMEs, that kind of thing, are set up in Route 53. For the gatekeeper piece, we have a couple of constraints here. So we see that there's a required DNS policy targeting gateway and required TLS policy targeting gateway. So if these two resources didn't exist, then they would be in violation. And we have another view of this in our Grafana dashboard we'll show near the end. So I've deployed an app to one of the clusters here, so we can have a quick look at that. We have a Petstore app here. So we have our pod running there, and we have our HTTP route, and here's the host name to access it. We also can see the Istio gateway that was created by Kuadrant via OCM. Now, for the API design piece, we have an open API spec for the Petstore app. So here's all the YAML of that open API spec. But if we focus in on a couple of pieces, we can see some Kuadrant extensions here. So let's scroll up here. And if we highlight the X Kuadrant pieces, so this piece here is specifying a route, the name of the route, the namespace, and a few other bits and pieces. I'll explain what that allows us to do in a moment. We also have, if we go down here, we have a backend ref specified in another X Kuadrant extension block. Same here for this one, for the different paths that we have. We also have, at the very bottom here, we have a security scheme. So that security scheme piece is important for the auth, for integrating the Kuadrant auth piece, the auth policy. There's one other piece here where we can specify a rate limit inside the Kuadrant extension, and that gets translated into rate limit policy. Now, how does that actually work? Well, we have this Kuadrant CTL tool. With that, we can have a look at what gets generated. So Kuadrant CTL will generate an auth policy from that open API spec and have a quick look at that. This will just spit out this auth policy here, and if we scroll down a little bit, we have the rules, and for this demo we're going to use an API key on this particular endpoint here, so /store/admin. For the rate limit policy, if we have a look at what that's doing, so we have a rate limit policy kind here. And for these two endpoints here, we have different rate limits being specified. So this is the rate limit policy API and the fields that are allowed in that. And then for the HTTP route, we have another command. So generate, this is the gateway API resource this time. And if you have a look at that, it has all of our paths that were in the Open API spec, as well as the host name being brought in here. So this is deployed. If we have a look at the deployed app, we have a Swagger deployed inside of it. So let's have a quick look here. We'll refresh here, get the latest version. So we have, say, a store inventory endpoint. And if we try that out, we can hit that and get a response here, so we can see what's in our inventory. Now, we have a rate limit policy that is specifying a limit of 10 requests in 10 seconds, I believe. So if we hit this repeatedly, eventually we should expect to get rate limited on this. So here we go, we get a too many requests and a 429 response. So our rate limit policy is being implemented by Kuadrant there. Now we also have an auth policy, and that's on the admin endpoint. So if I try this out, and we should get a 401 response. Now we need an API key to access that endpoint. Now there's a ton of different authentication configuration that you can use here. API key is just the simplest one we use for this demo. So if I go up here to the top and let's authorize, so we have an API key header. We'll set our value here, which we just set to secret. Authorize that and close that. So if we try that again, now we get a response here, 200, you're an admin. So that's the Petstore app deployed to the first cluster. We can deploy it to the second cluster here. In fact, we already have it deployed, but let's have a quick look here. We have our different resources here, our pod, HTTP route, auth policy, and rate limit policy. They all exist there. We should see our Istio gateway as well. There we go, so that's deployed here. Now, let's have a look at the two different clusters that are registered in the hub, specifically at the labels. So back in the hub, if we have a look at the managed clusters, we should see a label here. Let's pick it out as best we can. So kuadrant.io/lb attribute geocode EU, and on the second cluster that's set to US. So what Kuadrant does here via the DNS policy configuration is it will set up the appropriate DNS entries in Route 53, so we can have a quick look at that. So this is the zone in Route 53 that it's integrating with. We can see there's a wildcard entry here. There's a bunch of other entries, but the important ones to pick out here, there's a geolocation type here for Europe. And if we follow that through, that goes to this one here, which is 172.31.2010. And we have a US one here as well. And that will go through to this other IP address, 172.31.2020. So how can we actually show that? Because we're running everything locally. So to do that, we have this tool called GeoSite. So this helps us to visualize, as it says here, how websites are rendered and resolved in different geolocations. So we're going to use this to test and verify our geolocation strategy. So it's a very simple tool. You enter in a URL, you click fetch, and it gives you back how that website looks from different locations globally. So our URL we're going to use, we have an endpoint set up in our app already that returns the flag of where that is hosted. So in our EU cluster, we have that set up to return an EU flag. In the US cluster, return a US flag. So if we click fetch here, we'll get 2 bits of information back once it comes back. We'll say from the US, we get the DNS resolution here, which is the 202.0, And this is the screenshot which shows the US flag. And in Ireland, we get the 201.0 address and the EU flag. So to round everything out, let's have a look at what visual components we have for monitoring. So we have two dashboards here that we can look at. Our first one is our platform engineer view of the world. So we have an overview of gateways and policies. So we have our two Istio gateways, and we have our Kuadrant multi-cluster gateway in the hub. So this one causes the other two to be instantiated in either cluster. We have our gateway policies. So I mentioned the TLS policy and the DNS policy. And we have our route policies. So we have two rate limit policies, because there's two clusters, two apps, and two auth policies. And if there were any violations via Gatekeeper, they would show up here, but we're all good here. We have our TLS policy and DNS policy targeting our gateway. If we want a more fine-grained view, we have this app developer dashboard. So in here, we have a list of all of our APIs, which are actually just HTTP routes under the hood. What's the host name for it, and what's the deployment or workload that Istio uses for that. So we can see the request rate per second, the error rate, so our 401s will show up, or our 429s, that kind of thing. We have the request duration here with some percentiles as well. And down the bottom here, we have a much more detailed table view of those requests. So you can try this all out yourself. The prerequisites for trying it out are here. And all the steps are detailed, as well as the different components used in the hub cluster and the spoke clusters. Thanks very much.